This week on the Deep Leadership Podcast.
The disciplines are an invention. They don't exist. They're not a real thing. And the real world doesn't recognize them. And complex problems certainly do not recognize disciplinary boundaries. There are no such things as boundaries, just corridors in libraries.
This episode is brought to you by the Salty Sailor Coffee Company, the official coffee of the Deep Leadership Podcast. Salty Sailor is a veteran-owned coffee brand on a mission to deliver premium, fresh roasted coffee while making a positive impact in the world. Their motto is drink coffee and do good, which reflects their commitment to making amazing coffee and actively supporting the military community. 10% of every order goes to the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, an organization dedicated to helping sailors, Marines, and their families in times of need. All our listeners get 10% off every order of their amazing coffee by using the discount code DEEP at checkout. So check them out at saltysailorcoffee.com. Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Ed Fidoe. Ed is the founder and CEO of the London Interdisciplinary School, and in this role, he is leading a revolution in higher education with an interdisciplinary curriculum focused on tackling complex global issues such as inequality, sustainability, ethics, and AI. Prior to founding the school, Ed was involved with other educational startups and had a tenure with McKinsey Co. I'm excited to have him on the show to talk about the future of talent and business education. So, Ed, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
It is good to meet you. And there's so much to talk about here. I've been a little critical of MBA programs throughout my time in teaching. When I teach at schools, there's not a lot of focus on leadership, which is my big gripe with MBA programs. But it's one thing to complain about it; it's another thing to start up a whole school. So my hat's off to you for this. And I really want to understand a little bit about what it is that you do and the idea of interdisciplinary thinking. So first of all, what is that concept and why do you feel it's really important for modern leaders to understand?
Yeah, well, I think it's worth starting with why education is organized as it is. And actually a big part of why we have disciplines, which are only a couple of hundred years old, they're a relatively modern phenomena if you take the long view, is because we had to organize knowledge somehow. We had to organize it into books and to people's brains, and we had to have libraries, and we had to organize those libraries into corridors. And we used, certainly in the UK and beyond, the Dewey Decimal System, where you would have kind of certain numbers connoting, let's say, social sciences, and then you'd move down the corridor and have more decimal places on the Dewey number, and you'd be down to sort of folklore, and then you'd end up with Cornish pixies, a couple of books on Cornish pixies down the corner. And we've designed our education system like it's a library. So we've said, right, you're going to do a degree in social sciences, or you're going to do a master's in folklore, right? And you might do a PhD in Cornish pixies. To stay on that theme, I did a degree in mechanical engineering. This is simply a way of organizing knowledge. And so interdisciplinary education is saying we're going to look through that, past that, break that up, and we're going to reorganize the knowledge in a different way. Because actually, the world is not organized like a library. The world is interdisciplinary, and young people now as well, when they're learning outside of school, learn in a very interdisciplinary way because the internet has the knowledge just there at the touch of a finger. It's all interconnected. And then when they graduate, they go and work in companies which are dealing with interdisciplinary problems. So it means that you might, let's say at LIS, you're looking at a problem of AI, you'll be being taught by a philosopher who's joined us from the London School of Economics about some of the ethical aspects of that, and a lawyer, as well as a machine learning expert and a data scientist who's joined us from Berkeley, right? And so you've got all those perspectives, and you're trying to integrate them in an interdisciplinary way. It's not that you're just doing a computer science degree.
Yeah, well, and again, I think as you're saying, it's the way the world works today. It's the way we experience the world. But so how do you develop how do you build a curriculum like that? So a lot of cases when you're building an expertise, like I'm also a mechanical engineer, you build some basic structure, and then you get to more advanced. By your 4-year point, you're really doing some really advanced work. How do you build a interdisciplinary curriculum? What does that look like, and how do you cover the gamuts of all the different things that someone could learn? How do you set that up?
Yeah, because the problem is, once you start to think in an interdisciplinary way, then everything's on the table in a way. There's
Right.
nothing ruled out, because actually, every discipline could say we've got something to say about climate change, or we've got something to say about inequality, and they do. And so you have to sit back and think, right, what are we trying to do here with this university education? So we started with a bachelor's education. We're moving up to challenge next year the MBA. But we started with our bachelor's in 2021, and we said, right, well, how are we going to teach this? And what you really want to do is create learners that are oriented in multiple different disciplinary areas and have the confidence to go and become experts quickly in those areas and can start to make connections between them. That's what you want to get to, because that's useful for the world. And that's also useful in lots of jobs, but we need more people who can combine that knowledge, who can have conversations with people who would have much narrower expertise in order to tackle problems. To be specific, if you can imagine during COVID, if in Britain, around the cabinet table, we had most of the people sitting around that table had a humanities degree, so a degree in English or history, sometimes in politics and philosophy, sitting around that table. Very few scientists, very few civil servants had it. What if we'd had 2 or 3 people who had an interdisciplinary capability, who said, we need to have some scientists in the room, but I'm going to question them in the right way, but I'm also going to get an economist in the room and a lawyer in the room, and we can sort of facilitate that conversation. So designing the curriculum, you say, well, we're going to take 3 disciplinary perspectives each time on a complex problem. We're going to make sure you're always learning quantitative and qualitative skills. So there's no kind of saying, well, I don't do maths anymore because I don't like maths. That's not going to
Hmm.
work in a world that is swilling with data everywhere. So our students are doing statistical analysis and coding and data science on the quant side, as well as others. On the qualitative side, they might be doing ethnographic research, designing surveys, understanding how to visualize data in essentially using artistic techniques. So it's qual and quant, and then it's different disciplinary perspectives on a problem. And the complexity comes not from going kind of deeper and deeper and deeper, which actually is a perspective that I'll challenge even on mechanical engineering, but being able to look at more and more complex problems from different perspectives and deal with that complexity in more advanced ways through your interdisciplinary approaches.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I know, we were talking before we press record. I went to school at Cambridge in the UK, and one of the things that was always interesting to me is every week they brought in an expert from a completely different discipline. And
Right.
like entomology, for example, we were studying
Yeah.
leadership in manufacturing, but we had a different professor from a different department come in and just give an hour lecture. And I thought to myself, that was really good because it sort of exposed people like me who was sort of focused, like I'm focused in technical disciplines, engineering, manufacturing, all that. But then
Right.
I'm getting to see like what other people are doing in other disciplines. And it was sort of it really created some interesting conversations with our cohort as we went through some of those lectures. Um, but I can imagine that it's really difficult to sort of figure out, like, okay, maybe we've got a problem, and here are all the disciplines, how to create that curriculum, how to create it
Well,
so that it,
I'll be honest.
at the
Yeah,
end
I'll
of the
be
day,
honest.
you have an expertise, or you have
Yeah.
some sort of skill set that you can present to the world.
Well, I think there's 2 parts to it. One is that. So one is, and we've got graduates for the first time this summer, and they are having to go out into the world and describe what the hell it is that they've been studying for
Yeah,
3 years,
right,
right?
right.
And that's not straightforward. But I was doing some CV coaching to one of the students. I'm not doing this too often, but and he showed me the 1-page version. And in that first paragraph, he had no frills, no narrative, just straightforwardly, he says, I can do, I can do Python, I can do data, I've got some data science skills. He all lists out his statistical analysis. He's got all these different qualitative skills. He can do ethnographic research. He can do survey design, all these different things. And I just thought, as an employer, I'm looking at that and thinking, really, you can do all those things? And he really can do all those things because he's done those things to sort of, the same level that I did fluid mechanics 1 and fluid mechanics 2 on my mechanical engineering degree. He's done data science 1 and data science 2, right? So he's effectively done a degree level in all of these different areas. So that's very compelling. On a really pragmatic level, with me and the dean trying to design a curriculum, you can't have 500 faculty straight out the blocks, right? So we had to have 12 faculty in our first year. And that constrains you, and that makes you mind up on some things. Okay, here's how we're going to think about
Yeah,
sustainability. We got these 3 perspectives, and that's what we're going to have to do. So
yeah.
that's it. So there was a sort of business constraint, if you like, as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Again, it's very creative. That's why when I saw what you did, I thought it would be interesting to hear, just because we have a lot of leaders that listen in, and the truth of the matter is I've gone from being very an expert in one particular area like engineering, that I'm more of a generalist now. I run a business, so I have to know a
Right.
lot of different skills to be successful, and so I've gone from being really specific to really general in my knowledge. So I
Yeah.
see the value in this. Today's leaders need to be more generalists. Don't you think that that's the case? And I think that's where
I,
you're. Yeah,
I think it's probably always been the case, and I think it's never been the case as much as it is today. So I think
yeah,
that certainly if you're leading a large organization, but arguably any size organization, you need to understand something about the energy transition, right? It helps to understand some of the physics of the energy transition. During COVID, it helped to understand some of the science, some of the biology behind it, just to be able to kind of take your own point of view, to understand some of the material science of sustainability, to understand some of the technological underpinnings of AI. So that, a lot of people know the kind of first couple of paragraphs about AI, generative AI, and then they sort of stop and go, yeah, that'll do. And that doesn't cut it if you're a leader in a modern organization. And also, as these
yeah.
organizations get really large and employees are coming demanding all these different things, you need to understand the sort of science of social groups. And sometimes, and which is something we're really interested in, is an idea called super concepts, which are essentially enduring truths. These are things which won't change. So things like evolution, things like entropy, which you'll know from mechanical engineering and beyond. The world just obeys these laws. There's always going to be entropy is always going to increase without anything being injected into the system. Evolution is a really interesting pattern of growth and development, which now is not just relevant to biology, but happens in computer science. It is relevant in various different fields. And these super concepts, the power of narrative, there are many of them. And actually, for leaders to understand these interdisciplinary concepts, which are probably going to remain true in the future, help ground you and root you, as well as understanding the things that are changing really quickly.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, do you have any sort of like I don't know, like examples, or maybe people that or maybe leaders or people, public figures that take that kind of approach, an interdisciplinary approach to the way they do things, as sort of as point to an example of someone that's doing it right today? Do you have any examples of that, or people that sort of are your role model for this type of leader?
I think it depends. So I think we need more of them. There are people I can point to, and there's some very famous ones which I can point to. I think you tend to see a difference between someone who founds a company, who's an innovator, who understands the product, or is often an engineer. So someone like Musk, the Google guys. Musk is combining physics with engineering, with computer science in the businesses that he's building, and he has. Jobs did the same thing. Lots of the CEOs who were there at the start. The Sony CEO back in the 40s and 50s were physicists. They understood the materials they were using, they understood the technology, and they were able to combine that with their business acumen, with an understanding of marketing. And I think too often people who are taking over companies are being put in there with kind of more narrow expertise. Maybe they've just worked in the marketing department and then they come across and run the organization, or they've just worked in the sort of often CFOs, so they're coming in with a financial perspective. And you typically see these kinds of leaders spending less on R&D than the people who understood what the researchers were doing, right? So that's really important. So I say, where's it useful? It's useful where you're trying to interested in technological innovation or any kind of innovation. It's useful to have somebody leading the company that can understand that, can lean in and have what we call interactional expertise. So this is a kind of concept which has been around for a little while, but we use it a lot, which is it's that level of expertise that exists between being a real generalist who kind of knows a little bit about a lot of things, and being someone who's right at the bleeding edge. So they're, what we call a contributing expert. They will be moving the field along. There's this huge space in between, and it's called interactional expertise. And lots of us have it in lots of areas, right? And so if you have interactional expertise in design and in marketing and in technology, which means you can have conversations with all those people in a meaningful way and ask great questions, then you can start to connect the dots and have a holistic view of the product. In Jobs' case, the iPhone, you can bring that level of interaction, expertise together to create great products. But in any innovation, I mean, Darwin needed to draw on biology and ecology and even economics with the concept of competition to come up with that theory of evolution we've just talked about. Einstein was drawing on various disciplines of maths and physics and astronomy and so on. So, the innovators are almost always drawing on multiple disciplines. And so that's the key thing to look for. If you need it, you probably need an interdisciplinary approach.
I really like that. I mean, because one of the things I've observed, I mean, I came through a technical track. I mean, I've been leading technical teams forever, but I'm an engineer, and so one of the areas you talked about this interactional expertise. One of the things I noticed as a business owner running a manufacturing business, like I understand the engineering side of it. I understand the product and how it's developed, and the stage gates and what it takes to get a product to market. And I've launched so many products. So I think it's great because, like you said, I have the ability to ask. Now, I don't design products anymore. I haven't designed a product for 20 years, right?
Right.
But I have that interactional expertise where I can actually ask the tough questions. I can, I can raise my eyebrows when I hear, like, wait, what? That doesn't make sense to me. Explain that, why that is. And so I think what it ends up happening is we have a stronger engineering team here at my company because they have a boss that sort of, I don't micromanage them, but I at least know the right questions to ask, or I see something that doesn't, or I sense something doesn't seem right based on my past experiences. So, and I think the team likes to having a boss that has that ability to be able to look at these projects and go, wait a second, have you thought about this? Just, because I ran into this problem 15 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, totally. I think that's completely right. And we actually run a short program called cross-functional leadership, which is for older learners who are aspiring to that level of leadership where they're starting to manage people who have got expertise that they, more expertise than them in certain areas, which happens in many, many jobs. When I was at McKinsey, it actually doesn't happen because you have a sort of master apprentice. You come through having a generous set of knowledge, and everybody has that same generalist set of knowledge. But in most organizations, you'll end up managing, like the NHS, who is our health system, who we work with a lot. You're managing people with very different medical sets of expertise. And so how do you do that? How do you have it? Do you just delegate entirely and just say, well, you're the expert, you get on with it? And we would say that's actually doesn't lead to the best results. So as you're talking about, you'd have somebody who said, well, how much expertise in this area do I need? What is the level of interactional expertise that I need? That's a really important question. And if you're starting from nothing, then you should build it up. If the answer is that you need some, and it usually is, then you have to think about, how am I going to learn, and not be ashamed and say, well, you're the expert, I'm not, therefore I'll leave you to it. It's probably not going to lead to the best results always, right? So, and then if you've got multiple people in your team with the different expertise, that's quite hard for you. But you'll then be able to make connections between these, and you'll have a very unique network of expertise, which is really valuable.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. One of the things I've noticed in leadership is that we tend to think that, or we tend to say, well, I'm going to delegate it, and I don't need to understand it. I'll let my experts do it. But the truth of the matter is that, I go back to my Navy days when the seas were rough and we were in a bad situation and we're in the North Atlantic in the middle of a winter storm. Every eye looked to the captain, right, and say, does this guy know what he's doing? Right? Should I be nervous? Should I be scared? And so I think teams look to their leaders, and competency is an important thing. Like, we have to be not just good at delegating, good at with people. We actually have to be competent as well. And I think the idea of having this interdisciplinary expertise where you know a lot about a lot, I think it makes you a more competent leader versus someone that says, well, I'll just let my experts handle it. I think you may not have mastery in all disciplines, but you should have mastery in a few and expertise in others, I would think.
Yeah, I think that's it. And it's the expertise in others that we're most interested in. And we're certainly not saying that we should stop having people doing 3-year degrees in very narrow areas. We need those kinds of experts as well. It's just that you need some people with a broader range of knowledge. And the idea of really hyper useful knowledge and sometimes seemingly useless knowledge or redundant knowledge, this idea of redundant knowledge is actually quite important. So people that just are broadening their intellectual kind of breadth and range, learning things that they think might never be useful, is a really important thing, because almost by definition, in a changing world and when unexpected things come up, There'll be some things that we haven't been learning, they wouldn't have come up if if it was just fit into our kind of little box. It'll be outside of the box stuff that comes up. And if we've been reading around our subject and learning more, we think we'll have more resilience, more ability to be able to respond, because someone's going to have the idea, be able to connect the dots and come up with the ideas that they're required to tackle that new problem, if they've got this unexpected knowledge. Otherwise, it's not really a problem, right? If it just fits with everybody's normal everyday knowledge, then it's not a problem. So, and we know we're going to have these problems. It seems more and more often. So saying to somebody, look, redundant knowledge is actually could one day be really useful. So go ahead and learn a wide range of things.
Yeah, I agree with that. So we've kind of danced around the issue a little bit. Let me tackle it head on. What's wrong with a traditional MBA program?
Well, look, I was at McKinsey. I've got lots of friends that did MBAs, so
I've got one, so you're not going to hurt my feelings.
No, exactly. You've got one as well. But I've got to get comfortable with being a bit rude about them. I think, look, I think MBA, again, history sort of helps us here. So if you take a long view, they were brought in maybe 100 years ago, just over, and they did a very useful thing, I think, which was to train a bunch of people in the functions of a business, when most people in businesses then didn't have that kind of general set of understanding of marketing and accountancy, and there wasn't much knowledge transfer between companies. So, and there wasn't the internet, so people weren't reading marketing books and accountancy books. So you came out kind of like a ninja, and you had these skills in all these different areas. But I think over the last 40 or 50 years, the MBA has been used more of a credential and a networking exercise, honestly. And obviously, it's an extraordinarily expensive one. The knowledge itself is available. The knowledge is available, anywhere on the internet. That's true of most degrees, by the way. But I actually think, more importantly, the knowledge that you get in an MBA is available in a lot of organizations today. So I don't think MBAs are bringing in knowledge and companies going, thank goodness you're here and you know all this new stuff. I don't think that's true anymore. So what's the program that could bring that in? And our view is it's somebody coming in saying, I can take an interdisciplinary view on sustainability, energy transition, generative AI. And because, and by the way, I've been taught by a theoretical physicist, a material scientist, an AI expert. Those expertise don't exist in companies on the whole. But on the whole, companies do need, you'll be the new ninjas if you can do this. And I think the MBA breaks things apart. It's great at disaggregating and analyzing and breaking things into bits. That the world is more interconnected now than ever. So we need synthesizers, people who can put things together, who can kind of understand where the feedback loops are, understand what relates to what and how it's interrelated. So we would have a more kind of focus on synthesis than just analysis. And I think through building this interaction expertise, people who can really look at product and product innovation as well. So I think too much of MBAs isn't focused on the actual business the business does. It tends to be focused on the supporting functions, so on accountancy and finance and strategy, rather than what are you actually building and making, and what do you need to know to be able to talk to the engineers and the designers in that lab. There's not enough of that in MBAs as well. So that was a long answer, but we've been thinking about it a lot.
No, it's good. I really appreciate what you're saying, because I took my MBA a long time ago, and I think back it's it gave me some basic skills to understand, like, accounting, marketing, product development, new product introduction, all that kind of stuff. But it lacked sort of the big thing, which was like, how do you lead people to get difficult things done? Really, that's really what I've done my whole career. It's like, so I need someone to teach me that, right?
Yeah.
Because that seems to be something that's important. So, but yeah, I like the idea that what we have in an MBA is sort of like these sort of expertise in business functions, not necessarily bringing it all together to change the world or to do something really difficult and interesting.
Yeah.
I would argue that Steve Jobs was probably, his accounting skills probably sucked, right? But he combined some really interesting expertise to be able to create, to change the world essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you look at accounting and marketing, we don't actually know what those functions are going to look like in 10 years with generative AI. I mean, and finance, it's, that they're quite, I think, fragile. For the first time in a while, becoming an accountant isn't a particularly safe job, right? Same with being a lawyer, because we don't really know what those professions are going to look like or how much demand there'll be for humans in them. Whereas the ability to, we're going to be stuck with some long-term complex problems for sure, because we've been sat with, technology has always brought us challenges. Climate change has been with us for 40, 50 years. We've known about it for that long anyway. We've known about pollution and the problems of sustainability and externalities for a long time. They'll still be with us in 40 years. And so those feel like enduring things. So in a sense, thinking about your career or your business as tackling problems rather than thinking about it as a profession is potentially a more enduring, more resilient way to think, because these problems are not going away. Whereas if you just think of yourself as a guy that sits in accounting or a woman that sits in marketing, I think that is in some sense, it's a riskier way to think about your career, particularly if you're just starting out.
Where do you see your graduates going into? Do you see them going into businesses, big businesses, small businesses, an entrepreneurial kind of roles, or do you see them going into government? Because I sense that our problems are big in government, across the world, and our skill sets are low in that area. I don't know. Where do you see your graduates going with this kind of an education?
Well, we had a senior civil servant come in a year ago, and he said, "I hope half of you go into the civil service in the UK, which is government administration, and half of you become politicians." So he really
Yes.
felt like we needed this skill set. Now, I think that would be great, but truth of it is, we already have some students with jobs. No one's graduated yet, but so one's got a job at a startup, an AI startup, as head of growth. She's got a couple of years experience already, so she's going in quite a senior role. Someone has got onto the graduate scheme at Goldman Sachs, which is not what I expected. But
Wow.
Goldman Sachs seem excited by this interdisciplinary approach. Who knew? And then I think we'll have quite a few who are looking at NGOs. Someone's got an accelerated program which gets you into the police force. So it's for top graduates, typically Oxford and Cambridge graduates, who go on an accelerated program through the police force to inject a new kind of thinking into the police, which is much needed. So, he'll be tackling some pretty complex problems. I think we expect to see a range. Some want to start their own business straight out of university, which we're going to support them to do. I think it's a very hard thing to do, by the way, to start a business straight out of uni, but we'll be supporting them to give it a go. The other thing is that our first cohort of students are risk takers inherently. So I think we'll get a disproportionate number of entrepreneurial ones because they're crazy enough to come to a completely new university, when most of them could have gone somewhere perfectly respectable, and 100 years old, and they've decided to come to us. So, but no, we're seeing the full range, which is really, really unusual, because in my mechanical engineering degree, I don't know about yours, there was about 20% went off into engineering and the rest went into the banking and consulting, pretty much. And so there was not much variety there.
Yeah, interesting. So it's interesting to take, so I actually, my undergraduate degree was from Worcester Polytech in Worcester, Massachusetts, and they took an innovative approach back in the day. And
cool.
So you worked on projects. It was project focused, and so you learned your skills through doing projects, and including design work and what have you. But I've found over the years that I was thankful that I had that kind of an unusual sort of undergraduate. Now, the hard part was the GPA, our GPA never looked the same as other universities because the way they did they evaluated you based on projects. But what I found is that most of my life was working on project work, and so I was thankful that I went to a sort of a alternate view of education and developed this sort of project mindset, because it's helped me throughout my career. So I think, my hat's off to your early students who are, again, risk takers and willing to try something new, because I think what they're going to find that they've developed something that's going to be helpful throughout their entire career. It's a different way.
That's what we're telling them.
It's a different way of looking at education.
It is.
And I love that. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, John. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I often think of like the people that went to school before us, because I got a chance to go to Cambridge, and you think of the people that went to school there when the school was new, they were interdisciplinary students. They learned everything, not just one specific thing. They learned philosophy, they learned language, they learned the early, growth of math and science, and they were thinkers, and they were developers, and they were amazing, and I think we're kind of going back to the roots of education, what it sounds like.
That's the idea. It's to say, if you take the long view of 10,000 years of education, let's say, I mean, it kind of goes beyond that if you like, really, but it's only in the last couple of hundred years we've had these disciplines. And yet people look at us slightly funny when they say, but what are you actually studying? What are you going to get a degree in? I don't understand it. Whereas before you would just get your degree from Oxford or Cambridge or whatever, or Harvard.
Yeah.
So this in some ways isn't a new idea. What's newest about our idea is that we're saying we're not going to organize it around a discipline, but it's also not going to be a random pick and mix, which you can sometimes get in liberal arts and sciences, which I think would be great, by the way. And if we'd had them in the UK when I was going to university, I'd have been very excited about doing a liberal arts and sciences degree. But we are going to organize them. We're going to organize them around a complex problem. So that's the thing that we think is new and that hasn't been done before. Because it's only when you do that you really start to force your mind to think, I'm going to stand in these shoes as an anthropologist and think about this problem of inequality, or I'm going to stand in the shoes of a mathematician, a network scientist, and think about this problem of inequality. And it's only when you do that you just think, yeah, wow, okay, this is now turning on, this is now lighting up this kind of three-dimensional problem in a completely new way, and I'm realizing all my blind spots. So it's a kind of instrumental. It's like we're trying to be really useful in our interdisciplinary approach. But you're right. The disciplines are an invention. They don't exist. They're not a real thing, and the real world doesn't recognize them. And complex problems certainly do not recognize disciplinary boundaries. There are no such things as boundaries. Just corridors in libraries.
Absolutely love that. So just to wrap up, what final message would you like to leave with our listeners on this topic?
Well, I think if you're employers, if you're managing people, I think make sure that you can sort of take off your blind spots in terms of your employees' expertise. All of your employees will have this, rather than a kind of depth of expertise. Think about it as a kind of network, a kind of almost like a set of molecules all connected to each other. Everybody's got a completely unique set of expertise. Everybody's been to school, so they've got a bit of breadth, but they've all been interested in different things. Some have gone to university, some have been doing a job for 5 years or 20 years. But everybody has expertise that is hidden. They'll all be reading books that you don't know about. Try and take an interest in their interests, and you'll realize that your organization has so much more knowledge and expertise than you originally thought about. That's the first thing. And secondly, think about the interactional expertise that you're going to build and where you're going to build it.
I love it. Such a great message. Such an innovative way to look at education. Ed, I really appreciate you coming on the show. How can listeners find out more about you and this new school?
Well, LIS is the place to go, which is it's the London Interdisciplinary School. So I'm sure you can put it on your show notes, but it's lis.ac.uk. LIS is on Twitter and Instagram and all of those platforms as well. I'm actually personally not, so there's no point trying to look for me. I'm not on social media. I'm a bit old-fashioned that way. But yeah, you'll get all the info you need on the website, and you can follow our launch of a new MBA Challenger.
Absolutely. Well, great. We're going to put links in the show notes for those resources. And again, listeners, think about this. Think about what Ed's talked about, what he's doing. It's innovative. It's different. Okay. It's creative, and it is really addressing the problems that we're facing as leaders. And so, I hope that this conversation really made you think twice about education, higher education, and what's really important to what we're bringing for skill sets into our businesses. So, Ed, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for sharing what you're doing. And again, my hat's off for you starting something that's completely different. And I wish you the best of luck in everything you're doing.
Thanks, John. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the conversation.
I did as well.